The two leaders got together before a dinner with their aides, a gathering that set the stage for further negotiations about North Korea's nuclear program. Hanoi, Vietnam. President Trump met with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, over dinner on Wednesday, opening the second historic summit meeting between the two to discuss steps North Korea should take to dismantle its nuclear weapons program and measures to establish a permanent peace on the divided Korean peninsula. "I think your country has tremendous economic potential," Mr. Trump told Mr. Kim after the two shook hands against a backdrop of North Korean and American flags and in front of a roomful of reporters in Hanoi, Vietnam. "I think you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen." Mr. Kim did not address the reporters, although he and Mr. Trump whispered to each other when they first met. Wearing a black, Asian-style suit, he sat and smiled as Mr. Trump spoke to him. At dinner, he praised Mr. Trump for a courageous decision to start a dialogue. The two leaders met at the Metropole Hotel in downtown Hanoi, the capital of a country that is undergoing rapid economic growth decades after a communist army defeated the American military and their South Vietnamese allies in a costly civil war. American officials hope first-hand evidence of that economic transformation will help persuade Mr. Kim to end his nuclear program and establish robust trade ties with the United States, South Korea and other nations. Back in Washington, Mr. Trump was the subject of a searing day of testimony by Michael D. Cohen, his former lawyer and fixer, who called the American president a racist, a con man and a cheat before the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Cohen described Mr. Trump as an accidental leader who cared little for the American people, saying he had campaigned for president simply as an infomercial to promote the Trump brand, with no expectations of winning. But in Hanoi, the meeting with Mr. Kim took center stage. Mr. Trump's motorcade pulled up to the Metropole after dark. The hotel, one block east of Hon Kiem Lake, has suites named after prominent past guests, Charlie Chaplin, Graham Greene and Somerset Maugham. But it is safe to say that few dinners there have featured as unlikely a pairing as the one on Wednesday night. American negotiators, including Stephen E. Biegun, the State Department's special representative for North Korea, arrived in Hanoi several days ahead of Mr. Trump to meet with North Korean counterparts and lay the groundwork for Thursday's talks. The United States hopes to get Mr. Kim to agree to meaningful steps toward denuclearization, in contrast to the results of the meeting between the two leaders last June in Singapore. At the end of that meeting, officials issued a vague communiqué that said the countries would work together on 4 points: improving relations, establishing a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean peninsula, affirming that Pyongyang would work toward complete denuclearization of the peninsula, and the mutual return of remains from soldiers killed in the Korean War. Mr. Trump then said on Twitter that there was no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. But by this year, senior American officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John R. Bolton, the National Security Advisor, were asserting the opposite, that the threat remained and that the North had done little to dismantle its nuclear program, despite Mr. Pompeo's attempts at diplomacy. Mr. Pompeo attended the Wednesday dinner with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump's success or failure in moving toward denuclearizing North Korea, what the meetings are supposed to be all about, may hinge on one measure: the fate of a remote nuclear site surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, under watch by American intelligence since the early 1980s. The site, called Yongbyon, is the centerpiece of North Korean nuclear fuel making. If Mr. Trump can get the production of nuclear fuel stopped at Yongbyon, he will have at least frozen the program, though at a moment when the North has 30 to 60 nuclear weapons. Halting production would mean dismantling the old reactor, neutralizing a new one, and taking apart a uranium enrichment facility. American intelligence officials say they believe there is at least one other such facility apart from Yongbyon. Mr. Trump has been told that if he can get the facilities destroyed, he will have made progress no other president ever has. If he cannot, the North Koreans will just keep producing fuel, and maybe new bombs, while the talks drag on. And of course, Mr. Trump needs to get Mr. Kim to agree to readmit international inspectors, who were thrown out years ago. It would be their job to document which facilities were being taken apart, and to track the stockpiles of uranium and plutonium. That's what denuclearization would look like, but this will be a very hard job, Joseph Y-Yun, a former North Korea envoy for the State Department, said here in Hanoi. For their part, the North Koreans want concessions from the United States that could jumpstart their economy, like sanctions relief. Jean H. Lee, a Korea expert at the Wilson Center, a Washington-based research organization, said of Mr. Kim that he does want a changed relationship with the United States, and to improve his country's shattered economy. But we need to remember that he sacrificed his people's well-being, making decisions that deprive them of food, clean water, electricity, heat and medicine, in order to build nuclear weapons, Ms. Lee added. He won't be willing to give his weapons up readily, and may be prepared to sacrifice his people again if things don't go his way. Mr. Kim also wants an end-of-war declaration, which would be short of a peace treaty, to replace the armistice reached in 1953 that halted the Korean War. Mr. Trump reportedly agreed to just that when the men met in Singapore, but he pulled back after his advisors said it would be bad negotiating strategy to give the North a formal end to hostilities in return for precious little. One likely outcome of the summit meetings is that Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim will agree that South Korea can step up its direct economic interchanges with the North, even if United Nations sanctions on the country remain.